Okay, so this week in maths, we're going to be moving on to fractions. It's one of my favourite concepts to teach, especially because you can have so much fun with it. And at school, we usually do like sweet shop fractions, smarty fractions, fruit salad fractions, lots of practical activities. Play-Doh is another great one for fractions. These are what fractions look like. You may or may not have seen them before. Year 2s, I'm pretty sure you would have seen them before. We have already looked at halving numbers, and some of the activities that you've done at home, I'm going to ask you to do again. And that's because division, dividing, and fractions, they have a close relationship. And I just thought it'd be easier for you to make those connections between the two with familiar activities, which is why some of the activities you'll be doing again. So this week we're going to be looking at halving, a half. And I know you're familiar with halving numbers, like half of 10 is 5, and using the cherry tree, the part whole model to work out halves. But we're actually looking at the fraction, a half, which is this. It still means the same. Still means we need two parts and we're cutting a whole number or a whole object into two. But it's just understanding what this actually means. So, a fraction is a part of a whole. So I'm going to take this paper plate. This is a whole paper plate. And what I mean by a whole paper plate is that there's no parts missing. There's nothing added to it. It's just one paper plate. If this was a number, it'd be the number 1. Okay, it's one paper plate. Now, with fractions, you're taking a part of that whole. So, whenever we have fractions, we have a top number and a bottom number. Excuse the paint on my fingers, I've been decorating. Now, the bottom number is the denominator, and that tells us how many parts the whole has been divided into. So, for a half, the bottom number is always 2, because when we're halving, we are sharing into 2, we're dividing into 2. If we're finding the half of 10 apples, we would share them in between 2 people. So, I'm going to take my whole and I need to cut or divide my whole into 2. The denominator is the number 2, so I need 2 parts. And just like dividing, they need to be equal. So there's no point me just drawing a line anywhere and saying, oh, I've got 2 parts, they must be equal. And that means down the middle. Well, sometimes it means down the middle. So I'm going to try and fold one-handed this paper plate. I may just have to put the phone down for a second. There we go. Right. This is really quickly so that you weren't staring at my floor for so long. Okay, so I folded it in half and there we have a line that's down the middle. Now both parts, this part and this part, are exactly the same. They're equal. Okay, what I will do is draw a line down the middle just so you can see it. You guys would use a ruler if you're drawing, if you have one, that is, so to practice using a ruler when drawing lines. Okay, so that is my one whole and I've divided it into 2 parts. The denominator is 2, I have 2 parts. The numerator is how many of those parts we're counting or considering. So for 1/2, we only consider 1 of the 2 parts. 1 out of 2. And I always remember the line as out of. 1 out of 2. So if I want to colour in 1 out of the 2 parts, what do I need to do? Do I need to colour them both in? No, I just need to consider 1 of the 2. So I'm just going to colour in 1 out of the 2 parts. So I have 1/2. I have a half. This is 1/2 and this side is 1/2. If we were to put those two together, if we were to put 1/2 add the other half, it would make a whole. Okay, whenever you get a fraction that the numerator and the denominator is the same, it's the same as 1. Okay, so if I had 2 halves, it would just be 1. But we are just looking at 1/2. Okay, I have got 1 out of 2 pieces, so I've got a half. Okay, so I've also got here And this is what I would like you to do at home. You can use Play-Doh or you can use Lego or anything. You can do it with your food again. If you want to, I will do another food activity next week when we look at quarters. But if you want to have another practice at halving your food, then absolutely. Okay, so slices of bread are great for halving because you can keep halving. You can halve and then halve again and halve again. Okay, so let's take the ball, okay? If I want to find half of a ball, I need to make sure I'm cutting exactly down the middle. Oh, where's my knife gone? Oh, gosh. I don't know where my knife's gone. I'll try and use the pen. Okay, so let's do the circle because I don't know where my knife's gone. Okay, if I've got a circle, I need to make sure it's exactly, and I just made this out of Play-Doh. We need to make sure it's exactly equal. The two parts are equal. Now I could halve it down the middle if I wanted to, but with some shapes, like circles, there are more than one way to halve it. So I'm going to halve it this side. Okay, so if I cut it down the middle, try and get it as equal as I can. Okay, so it doesn't matter if it was that I halved it vertically or horizontally. It doesn't matter as long as both parts are equal. Okay, so then what I will do is then on a piece of paper is I would write down the fraction of each part, and each part is worth 1/2. So I am going to write that down for each part. There we go. This part is 1/2 and this part is 1/2. I could do with plastic play foods, another good one, especially because if you use washable felt tips, obviously they wash off. So I'm going to make sure I'm halving it. Now I could, just like I did when I practiced this video. There we go, I've got two parts, but are they equal? Which means I have not shared them or divided them into halves. What I must do is make sure, I'm just going to draw a line very quickly, is make sure that they are equal, or I know there's this little jaggedy bit, but they're mostly equal. Now for year 2s, what we started to look at last year was how to represent a half. If I asked you to colour half of this in, I could colour in this top half here. Okay, which means I've got this part that I need to colour in, but I could colour in the opposite side. Because if I were to cut this out and stick it there, it would be exactly a half. So I've still got a half coloured in, and because this, add this makes a half. So year 2s, I want you to try and think a little bit outside the box. But if not, don't worry and just stick with this halving for now, because we can move on to this a little bit later, which is what I will talk about in the next video. Have fun with it. I'm going to see if I can squash this. See if I can cut it or something with my... No, I'm not going to do it. There we go. We do it like that way. Use the pen. Okay, so I've took my sphere shape, my ball of Play-Doh, and I've cut it exactly in half. On a piece of paper, I will then write how much each part is worth. 1/2, numerator 1, denominator 2, 1/2. So just have fun with it. And the best thing to do is create your own shapes and see if they can be halved. And see how many different ways you can halve them. Just lots of practice with this. But if you have any questions, let me know.